Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Ah,
Today we're taking a closer look at a review of the third episode of The Rings of Power.
yeah, it looks like this reviewer really had some strong opinions about it.
And it seems like a lot of you out there are interested in this too. Fantasy TV and adaptations, it's always a hot topic, right? This review gets into some pretty interesting stuff, like they were really impressed by the orcs.
Yeah, they went on and on about how the show makes them feel genuinely threatening and dangerous.
Which is important, right? Because we're talking about Tolkien here. Good and evil are kind of a big deal in his world.
Huge deal, yeah. The reviewer actually connected that to Tolkien's whole worldview. The idea that evil is this corrupting force that can twist even beauty into something monstrous.
And that tunnel escape scene, the one where the orcs just tear through
Oh
everything.
yeah, they mentioned that specifically. The reviewer loved how it shows the destructive power of evil, the way it leaves scars.
Makes you really appreciate why the elves are fighting so hard to stop them.
Absolutely. And the reviewer even pointed out how the show uses makeup and costumes to make the orcs look truly terrifying.
It's not just about making them ugly, though, is it? There's a whole history to the orcs in Tolkien's world. They were once elves, corrupted by Morgoth.
Right, there's a real tragedy to their existence. They're not just mindless monsters, they're victims in a way.
It adds a whole other layer to it, doesn't it? It's not just good versus evil. It's about the potential for corruption within even the most beautiful creations.
Definitely makes you think.
So the orcs were a big hit with the reviewer. But they also had some interesting thoughts about the show's structure. They even compared it to Game of Thrones.
Yeah, they pointed out how the story jumps between different characters and locations, just like in Game of Thrones.
Multiple storylines unfolding across this vast world.
Exactly. And they actually said that Rings of Power feels more like Game of Thrones in that respect than House of the Dragon does, which is kind of ironic since House of the Dragon is a direct prequel.
Right. You'd think it would follow that format more closely.
Makes you wonder what they're going for with Rings of Power. Are they trying to create something truly epic and sprawling, or will all these threads eventually come together?
I guess we'll have to wait and see. But I do remember the reviewer actually prefers a more focused type of story.
Oh yeah, they mentioned that. Something more like a single hero's journey.
But they also acknowledge that for a story as vast as Tolkien's, a multi-threaded approach might be necessary.
It's a tough balance, isn't it? You want to stay true to the scope of the world, but you don't want to lose the audience in a sea of characters and plot lines.
And it seems like that's where the reviewers started to have some reservations. They felt like the show was still in a prelude stage,
Yeah.
spending a lot of time on setup but not quite delivering on the adventure yet.
Interesting. It sounds like they were expecting a faster pace.
Yeah, they said it felt a bit slow. Like it was still laying the groundwork, but not quite getting to the heart of the story.
I can see that. Tolkien himself was a master of world building. Maybe the showrunners are trying to capture that same sense of depth and detail.
But at the same time, you don't want to bore the audience, right? Especially in this day and age where people are used to things moving quickly.
It's a delicate balance for sure. You need to hook the audience early on while also setting the stage for something grand.
And the visuals are stunning, no doubt. The reviewer even said that.
Oh yeah, they were blown away by the landscapes and the special effects.
But they felt like it was missing something. That sense of active discovery and wonder that Peter Jackson captured in his films.
Ah, I see. They're comparing it to the movies.
Yeah, they felt like Jackson's films had a sense of momentum, of characters actively pushing the story forward, while Rings of Power feels a bit more contemplative.
It's a valid point. Jackson's films were definitely more action-packed.
But then again, we're only 3 episodes in. Maybe it's too early to judge.
I think so. There's still plenty of time for the show to find its footing and really take off.
Well, speaking of taking off, the reviewer did point out one thing that seemed to signal a shift in this story. The Harfoots. They felt like their journey marked the start of something more active, more adventurous.
Oh, that's interesting. The Harfoots, are the ancestors of hobbits.
Right, and hobbits are all about journeys, aren't they? Bilbo Baggins, Frodo.
Exactly. So maybe the reviewer is onto something. Maybe the Harfoots' journey symbolizes the show itself shifting gears.
Finally hitting the open road and embracing that sense of exploration that's so central to Tolkien's work.
Oh, I like that. It makes me think about the other mysteries the show is setting up, like Halbrand.
Oh yeah, what's his deal? The reviewer was really intrigued by him.
His past is so shrouded in secrecy. And then there's that mysterious figure traveling with Nori. Who is he? A wizard. Maybe even Gandalf. The theories are running wild.
And of course, we can't forget about Adar. Is he Sauron in disguise?
That's the big question, isn't it? Everyone's dying to know.
The reviewer actually said they prefer Sauron as a more symbolic villain.
Oh yeah, lurking in the shadows, pulling the strings.
Exactly. They felt like that was more in line with Tolkien's portrayal of him.
It's a valid point. Sauron's power in the books comes from his ability to influence events from afar.
But can the show really pull that off?
Yeah.
Keeping him as this unseen force.
It's a tough challenge, especially in a visual medium like television.
Right. You need to find creative ways to suggest his presence without actually showing him.
But maybe they can do it. Maybe they can capture that same sense of dread and unease that Tolkien created with Sauron.
I guess we'll just have to wait and see how it all unfolds.
Definitely. Rings of Power is full of surprises, and I, for one, am excited to see where it all leads. I think they have a real shot at making it work, though, Making Sauron this shadowy figure.
You think so?
Huh.
It's a tricky thing to pull off in a visual medium like TV.
Oh, for sure. You can't just have him lurking in the background all the time, right?
Right. But Tolkien did such a good job of creating this sense of dread and unease just with the idea of Sauron.
Yeah, just his name was enough to make people tremble.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how do you translate that to the screen without actually showing him all the time?
Well, the reviewer did mention being intrigued by the cliffhanger with Adar.
Oh, yeah, that was a good one. Left us all wondering.
Right. So maybe the show is going for a slow burn approach. Maybe they're going to tease us with hints and glimpses of Sauron before finally revealing him in all his glory.
That could be really effective, actually.
Yeah.
Building up that anticipation.
Yeah, it'd be like the Balrog in Fellowship of the Ring. You only see it for a brief time, but it's terrifying.
Oh, yeah. That scene still gives me chills.
Right. And they could do something similar with Sauron, using light and shadow and maybe even distorted voices to create this sense of unease whenever he's around.
Ooh, that'd be creepy.
Right. Make it clear that he's a powerful and malevolent force, even if we don't see him directly.
So we've talked a lot about the big picture stuff, Orcs, narrative structure, pacing.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
But what about some of the smaller details that the reviewer picked up on? Like, they had some pretty strong opinions about the violence in the show.
Oh, yeah, they did. And I think their perspective as a Tolkien scholar is really interesting here.
How so?
Well, they pointed out that the violence in the show is always purposeful. It's never just there for shock value.
Yeah, I noticed that too. It's definitely not gratuitous.
Right. They brought up the orc attack on the elven village as an example.
Oh, man, that was brutal.
It was, but it served a purpose. It showed the real cost of evil, the way it disrupts and destroys.
Made you understand why the elves are so determined to fight back.
Absolutely. And even the way they filmed it with the orcs recoiling from the light, it reinforced that idea of them being creatures of darkness opposed to everything good and pure.
Yeah, it was all very deliberate. Very Tolkien.
Exactly. The reviewers was impressed by that. They felt like the show was really thinking about its use of violence.
That they weren't completely on board with all of it, right?
Well, they did mention Halbrand's fighting style as being a bit much for them.
Oh, right. They thought it was a bit over the top.
Yeah, a bit too flashy almost. Like it was trying too hard to be cool.
It's interesting, isn't it? That they were okay with the orc violence, but not with Halbrand's.
I guess it comes down to character, The orcs are inherently evil creatures. So their violence is kind of expected.
But a Halbrand is supposed to be more complex.
Yeah.
More nuanced.
Right. So maybe the reviewer felt like his fighting style didn't quite fit with that.
Or maybe they just thought it was too much. Too choreographed, too stylized.
It's a matter of taste, I suppose.
But I do think it's worth discussing, how much violence is too much in a fantasy show? And how do you portray it in a way that's impactful but not exploitative?
Definitely something to think about.
So we've got orcs as agents of chaos elves fighting for survival, and complex characters like Halbrand grappling with their own darkness.
Yeah, it's shaping up to be quite the epic story.
And speaking of characters, the reviewer was really impressed with how the show makes you care about them. Even the ones who are shrouded in mystery.
Oh yeah, they specifically called out Halbrand as being charismatic and compelling.
I gotta admit, I'm kind of drawn to him too.
Yeah.
But something about him,
Yeah, he's got this mysterious aura about him, like he's carrying a lot of baggage.
And that backstory of his, we still don't know much about it.
Right, and the reviewer picked up on that. They said they were genuinely invested in his story, wanting to see where it goes.
Makes you wonder if it's all going to tie back to Tolkien's themes.
Yeah.
Like hope and redemption.
It wouldn't surprise me Tolkien was a master at weaving those themes into his stories.
Even in the darkest of times, there's always that glimmer of hope.
Exactly. And it makes me think about the reviewer's earlier point about the Harfoots being a turning point in the narrative. Maybe their journey is about more than just finding a new home.
You think it could be about rediscovering that sense of hope?
I think it's possible, They're setting out into the unknown, facing all sorts of dangers, but they're doing it together. And maybe that's the key. That even in the face of adversity, there's strength and unity.
I love that idea. It gives their journey a whole new layer of meaning.
And it ties back to Tolkien's overall message,
Yeah.
that even the smallest and most unassuming creatures can make a difference.
The Hobbits certainly prove that.
Exactly. And maybe the Harfoots are going to do the same.
Now, wouldn't that be something? Seeing them play a pivotal role in the fight against Sauron.
It would be epic.
So the Harfoots are on their journey. Halbrand is shrouded in mystery. And we're all still wondering if Adar is Sauron in disguise.
The show is definitely keeping us guessing.
And the reviewer also mentioned how the show successfully makes you care about the other characters too.
Oh, yeah, they specifically mentioned Galadriel and her quest for vengeance.
Right, she's such a complex character. Driven by this need for revenge, but also by this deep sense of duty.
And the reviewer found her compelling, even though her methods are sometimes questionable.
Yeah, you can't help but root for her. Even when she's making decisions that you don't necessarily agree with.
It's like the show is saying that even the most righteous characters can be flawed.
They can make mistakes.
Yeah.
They can be driven by anger and grief.
But that doesn't make them any less heroic.
Right, it just makes them human.
And I think that's what makes these characters so relatable, so engaging.
They're not perfect. They're not always likable. But they feel real.
Exactly. And that's what makes you want to keep watching, to see what choices they make and how they ultimately overcome their challenges.
Well said. So we've got complex characters, stunning visuals, and a story that's slowly but surely starting to unfold.
But there's still one big elephant in the room, the pacing.
Ah, yes, the pacing. The reviewer definitely had some thoughts about that.
They did. They felt like it was a bit too slow, especially in the first few episodes.
Yeah, they wanted things to move a little faster.
Right. They felt like the show was spending too much time setting the stage and not enough time getting to the action.
Which is a valid criticism, I think. Especially in today's world where audiences are used to a faster pace.
But as we discussed earlier, maybe that's intentional. Maybe the showrunners are trying to build anticipation to really immerse us in this world before things really take off.
It's a risk, for sure.
It is. But it could also pay off big time. If they can pull it off, if they can make us care about these characters in this world enough to stick with them through the slower moments, the payoff could be incredible.
It's like those slow burn movies,
Yeah,
The ones that gradually build tension until you're on the edge of your seat.
exactly. And maybe that's what Rings of Power is aiming for, a slow burn that eventually explodes into an epic saga.
I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt.
Me too. They've earned it with the quality of the production, the depth of the characters, and their obvious respect for Tolkien's work.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. Orcs, violence, pacing, complex characters, and even some philosophical musings on good and evil. What's the one thing that really stuck with you from the reviewer's analysis?
That's a good question. For me, it was their emphasis on the importance of character, because ultimately that's what makes any story worth telling, right? It's about the human connection, the emotional investment. And Rings of Power, at least so far, seems to understand that.
Yeah, it's funny how those connections really draw us in.
Yeah.
We get invested in the characters and their journeys.
It's the heart of storytelling, isn't it? And Tolkien was such a master of creating these characters that felt real, even in this fantastical world.
And the reviewer definitely felt like the show was starting to capture that same magic, especially with the Harfoots.
Oh, yeah. They were really drawn to their story.
Yeah, they said it felt like the story was finally shifting gears, becoming more active, more adventurous.
Right. Like it was finally embracing that sense of exploration that's so essential to Tolkien.
I mean, think about it. Hobbits are all about journeys. Bilbo Baggins setting off with the dwarves, Frodo taking the ring to Mordor.
Yeah, it's in their blood.
Exactly. And the reviewer felt like the Harfoot's journey was a sign that the show was moving beyond the setup phase and into something more dynamic.
Makes sense. They're literally migrating, right? Leaving their home and venturing out into the unknown.
It reminds me of Bilbo in The Hobbit. He was perfectly content in his hobbit hole until Gandalf showed up and whisked him away on an adventure.
And look what happened there. He became a hero.
Right? Faced his fears, discovered hidden strengths within himself.
Maybe we're going to see something similar with the Harfoots and Rings of Power.
That would be amazing. To see them evolve from these simple folk into something more, maybe even playing a pivotal role in the fight against Sauron.
It wouldn't surprise me Tolkien loved to subvert expectations. Showing how even the smallest and most unassuming characters can make a difference.
Yeah, he was all about those little guys stepping up.
Exactly. And the Harfoots definitely fit that bill.
And the reviewer also picked up on how their journey reflects a shift in the show's visual style, too.
Oh, yeah. They mentioned that they felt like the camera was becoming more dynamic, Less focused on those sweeping landscapes and more on the characters themselves.
Like it was trying to capture the feeling of being on the road with all its challenges and discoveries.
It's like the show itself is embracing the idea of a journey.
And maybe that's intentional.
Mm.
Maybe the showrunners are deliberately playing with our expectations. Well, they start with this slower pace, emphasize the beauty of the world, and then gradually introduce more action and adventure as the story unfolds.
Ooh, that's a clever strategy.
It's like they're lulling us into a sense of peace before things get really intense.
Like the calm before the storm.
Exactly. And then, bam, the adventure kicks in.
Makes you appreciate those early episodes even more, doesn't it? Knowing that they were building to something bigger.
Yeah, it's like those slow burn movies that gradually build tension until you're on the edge of your seat.
And maybe that's what Rings of Power is aiming for. A slow burn that eventually explodes into an epic saga.
Well, they've certainly got the source material for it.
No doubt about that Tolkien created a world that's ripe for exploration.
And the reviewer's point about Sauron being this symbolic villain,
Yeah.
maybe that ties into the pacing too.
You think so?
Maybe they're building up to his eventual reveal,
Hmm.
letting his shadow loom over everything before he finally steps into the light.
That would be pretty chilling. To feel his presence growing throughout the series and then finally seeing him in all his terrifying glory.
It'd be like the Balrog all over again.
But even more intense.
Because Sauron is the ultimate evil in Tolkien's world.
Right. He's the one who corrupted the Orcs. He's the one who forged the One Ring. He's the big bad.
So to see him finally revealed on screen, that would be a moment for the ages.
No doubt about it.
Well, we've explored a lot in this deep dive. Orcs, the show's structure, the pacing, the characters. And it sounds like this reviewer had a lot to say about it all.
They did. They were clearly passionate about Tolkien's work and excited to see how Rings of Power was bringing it to life.
And I think they raised some really important points, about the challenges of adapting such a beloved and complex story.
It's not an easy task, that's for sure.
But I think it's a challenge worth taking on. And I, for one, am eager to see where Rings of Power takes us next.
Me too. It's an exciting time to be a Tolkien fan.
Absolutely. So to all of you listening out there, if you're intrigued by Tolkien's world, if you're looking for a show that will challenge and inspire you, then I encourage you to give Rings of Power a chance. You might just find yourself swept away on an epic adventure.
And if you're already watching it, stick with it. It's a journey worth taking.
Well said. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.